Here's a summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. In Gaza, Israeli airstrikes and quadcopter drone attacks killed approximately 40 people on Tuesday alone in Beit Lahia, Jabalia, Rafah, Khan Yunis, Burej refugee camp, and Nuseirat refugee camp. In Nuseirat, homes were flattened and people were killed as Israeli tanks pounded the area. Our contributor Abu Bakr Abed said that according to residents in Nuseirat, Israeli snipers and quadcopters have been operating on the western edge of the camp. Video footage, which we will not display here, shows mangled bodies laying in pools of blood on the street and people screaming over the bodies of children. At least 11 people were killed in the attacks. The attacks come just a day after Israel bombed 2 schools turned into shelters for displaced people in Nuseirat and in the beach refugee camp, killing at least 10, including children. The Gaza government media office said that the attacks, quote, come within the framework of the crime of genocide, as the number of shelters bombed by the occupation reached 183, including 163 schools housing hundreds of thousands of displaced persons. On Saturday, Israel carried out a massacre on the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 school in Gaza City, killing at least 22 Palestinians. The Gaza government media office stated that most of those killed were women and orphaned children who had sought shelter in the school. The UN Agency for Palestine Refugees stated that, quote, in Gaza, schools are no longer places of joy. They have been turned into rubble or overcrowded places of refuge for displaced families living in fear. Children deserve to study in schools, not to have to shelter in them. It is high time to restore education in Gaza. The Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor has published an extensive report on the ongoing health, humanitarian, economic, agricultural, and psychological effects of Israel's deliberate destruction of electricity lines, generators, and solar panels in Gaza for almost a full year now. Euromed says that the cutting off of electricity to Gaza over 11 and a half months, quote, has had catastrophic effects and long-lasting humanitarian repercussions, affecting every aspect of residents' lives. The subjection of over 2 million individuals to deplorable living conditions by Israel, including cutting off their electricity, is a tool of its ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. Many of the hundreds of thousands of Gaza Strip residents who are compelled to light wood fires in place of using cooking gas and electricity to cook and carry out daily tasks have already started to experience respiratory and vision issues that will likely have long-term or permanent effects on their health. A new investigation by Defense for Children International Palestine has revealed that Israeli forces used Palestinian children as human shields during the siege of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City in April. The group's field researchers in Gaza spoke with 2 Palestinian families who, along with their young children, were forced to walk alongside Israeli tanks as Israeli forces besieged Al-Shifa Hospital. Israeli forces have regularly used Palestinian children as human shields during the genocide in Gaza, according to documentation they've collected. Quote, on April 18th, Israeli forces surrounded the area near Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City with tanks, military bulldozers, and ground forces. The tanks fired toward a building opposite the hospital where Ahed and Tagrid were sheltering with their 5 children. Tala, 12, Ahmed, 11, Yazan, 8, and twins Amir and Jude, 1. Ahed and Tagrid raised white flags and shouted civilians. Tala, the 12-year-old girl, told Defense for Children International Palestine, quote, they put me, my mother, and my brothers in the middle of the tanks and kept shooting over our heads while the bulldozer was bulldozing around us. We were afraid to die. I was calling for my mother who was next to me, but my voice couldn't come out. Israeli forces detained the family for over 5 hours without food or water before they ordered them to move south. The month before, DCIP says that a 12-year-old boy, Moyayed, was waiting for aid when Israeli tanks surrounded him and a group of other Palestinian children. Israeli soldiers forced them to strip in the bitter cold, assaulted them with rifles, and tied them up with plastic cords next to the tanks amid heavy gunfire that lasted for hours. Quote, the army told us to walk in front of the tanks and then stop at every building they wanted to search, Moayed told DCIP. They put us with the rest of the children in front of the tank for a whole day without food or water. I had not had anything to eat or drink for 2 days. This week, we published a searing narrative feature by Assam Al-Nabi, an engineer and PhD researcher in Gaza. Assam currently serves as a member of the Emergency Committee and the spokesperson and director of public relations and media at the Gaza municipality. He writes, quote, by design, tents are meant to be a temporary shelter, not somewhere you would live for more than a few days or weeks at the most. Yet hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families have rotated from tents to UNRWA schools to sleeping in the streets for a few days before moving right back to square one in a loop. As bad as the tent sounds, it is not the worst day-to-day worry for ordinary Gazans. We wake up knowing we may not live to see the sunset, and we say our goodbyes to each other at night before going to sleep, knowing we may not see another dawn should there be an overnight airstrike. Should we survive the night, we wake up hungry, not knowing where food is going to come from. Imagine spending days without eating a morsel. It is hard to, unless you have spent months living or rather surviving like this yourself. In fact, the most sought after food in Gaza is an egg, let alone bread. Meat, meanwhile, is for a parallel universe galaxies away from Gaza. Children go to bed hungry, wake up hungry, and have suffered greatly due to this cruel campaign of starvation. Those who are sick, on a special diet for health reasons, or suffer from low blood sugar are either at severe risk or have already died. Mothers have skipped meals to conserve scraps of food for their children. Sure, we are hungry because there is no food. But when there is food, we can't swallow because we know there is always someone else out there who is starving. That's from Assam Al-Nabi's feature, A Conversation Between Life and Death in Gaza, on electronicintifada.net. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces raided the Al Jazeera bureau in Ramallah on Sunday, ordering the broadcaster to close operations for an arbitrary 45-day period. Al Jazeera reports that, quote, heavily armed and masked Israeli soldiers forcefully entered the building housing Al Jazeera's bureau and handed the 45-day closure order to the network's West Bank bureau chief Walid al-Omari early on Sunday. Al-Omari said the Israeli military's closure order accused the network of, quote, incitement to and support of terrorism. The network's Javara Bouderi said Israeli forces used tear gas in the vicinity of the Al Jazeera bureau and Al Manara Square in the heart of the occupied West Bank city. She added that Israeli soldiers confiscated their cameras and other recording equipment. Israeli military vehicles left Ramallah after the raid. Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim said the West Bank raid and the closure order come as no surprise after the ban earlier this year on reporting from inside Israel. Israeli forces were filmed ripping down a poster of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian-American journalist who was executed in Jenin in May 2022. Earlier in the week, Israeli forces killed 7 Palestinians during an invasion of the town of Qabatia, near Jenin, backed by armored bulldozers, fighter jets, and drones, according to Al Jazeera. The network and local news outlets showed video footage of Israeli soldiers pushing the bodies of Palestinians off of the roofs of homes that they had earlier raided and occupied. One soldier can be seen kicking one of the bodies until it falls off the roof. The 3 Palestinians had been shot on the rooftop earlier. And the Wafa news agency reported that a military bulldozer confiscated the bodies after they had been thrown and kicked off the roof. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated, quote, what happened in Qabatia defies the legal definition of war crimes as it is part of a systematic and ongoing pattern of dehumanization that Palestinians have endured for decades. The crimes committed in Qabatia reflect the ongoing genocidal practices Israel has carried out with impunity. Save the Children reported this week that on average, 5 Palestinian children have been either killed or injured by Israeli forces every day in the West Bank since October. Jeremy Stoner, the charity's Middle East regional director, said, quote, "These actions are not isolated incidents. They are part of a trend of increasing Israeli military operations and use of force that are systematically eroding the safety, security, and fundamental rights of Palestinian children who are paying the highest price in this escalating violence." Focusing now on Lebanon. After 2 days in a row of its terrorist attacks using personal communications devices last week, Israel bombed a building in Beirut on Friday, killing several high-level military commanders in Hezbollah's Radwan unit. On Monday, Israel launched major airstrikes across southern Lebanon and in Beirut, killing nearly 500 people and injuring approximately 1,700. On Tuesday, 60 more were killed. Lebanon's health minister Firas Abiad said that 50 children and 94 women were among those killed in the past 2 days. The attacks targeted medical centers, ambulances, civil defense teams, and the cars of people trying to flee the bombing. Israel hit more than 24 separate areas in its attacks on southern Lebanon. This video shows a bombing of Mazarat, Sinai. The Israeli army said that it had bombed more than 1,100 targets in 650 different attacks with more than 1,400 bombs only on Monday, claiming that the targets were locations where Hezbollah weaponry had been stored inside civilian homes, the same excuses the army uses in its genocidal attacks on Gaza. Israel killed a journalist with Al Mayadeen, Hadi Al Sayed Hassan, in an attack on his home on Monday. And on Tuesday, Israel again struck areas of the Dahia suburb of Beirut, killing at least 6 and injuring more than a dozen people. Al Jazeera reported this morning, Wednesday, that the Israeli military continued to strike targets in Beirut and across southern Lebanon, hitting 20 villages in the early morning hours. The Lebanese health ministry said that at least 50 have been killed and more than 200 wounded already today. Hezbollah has been hitting Israeli military targets in northern Israel, including the Atlit naval base south of Haifa and the Dado base near the northern city of Safad. The headquarters of Israel's Northern Military Command has also been targeted. Hezbollah has also launched rockets and missiles at Israeli settlement colonies inside the occupied West Bank and at the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. John will have much more details on the war later on in the program, and we'll discuss Hezbollah's strategy right after that. Meanwhile, the U.S. Pentagon announced that the Biden administration is sending additional American military forces to the region, with the department's spokesperson Patrick Ryder declining to specify how many more U.S. troops are being sent or what they would be tasked to do. The U.S. already has about 40,000 troops in the region. The Associated Press reported that on Monday, the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, 2 Navy destroyers, and a cruiser set sail from Norfolk, Virginia, headed to the 6th Fleet area in Europe on a regularly scheduled deployment, they say. Ryder said that, quote, "In light of increased tension in the Middle East and out of an abundance of caution, we are sending a small number of additional U.S. military personnel forward to augment our forces that are already in the region. But for operational security reasons, I'm not going to comment on or provide specifics." Palestinians, meanwhile, in Gaza declared their unwavering solidarity with the people of Lebanon. Journalist Hossam Shabat tweeted on Monday, quote, "The same scenario that occurred in Gaza is currently unfolding in Lebanon. Israel is a terrorist state, and the international community has granted them impunity to bomb and kill throughout the region without facing any consequences. From Gaza, we stand in solidarity with Lebanon." And Twitter user Denya posted this short video of the sunset in Palestine, saying, "The sun is setting in Palestine. Our hearts are with our people in Lebanon." And continuing on that thread of solidarity and shared struggles for liberation, this week in Gaza, the psychiatrist Mustafa al-Masri posted this video of children showing off their gardens, immaculately cared for in tent shelters. And our contributor Abu Bakr Abed in central Gaza shared this photo of blooming jasmine, saying, "My jasmine tree today, I'll never lose hope." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza.